Abortion is a topic that stirs up passion on both sides of the debate. It seems, however, that the pro-life side of the conversation is not being welcomed in the public square. Joining me now in studio today is Ruth Shaw. She's the Executive Director of National Campus Life Network in Ottawa, and we're going to discuss this very hot-button topic of abortion. Ruth, welcome to BCN.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me about your organization, NCLN. What is it all about?
Yeah, so we're a youth organization, an anti-abortion organization that works to persuade young people to reject abortion. So young people in Canada are the ones having the most abortions, and so we believe if we want to see an end to that, we need to address the demographic having them. And so the way that we do that is by localizing onto university campuses, where we mentor, train, and mobilize campus pro-life clubs to bring the anti-abortion message to campus.
Now, you believe that Canada, Ruth, will one day be abortion-free? How is that possible in a country like ours?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to happen in a short amount of time. But if you look at other movements, especially on the left and in any other sphere, where you're able to catalyze people and speak to people and get them to adopt certain life-affirming values through repeated messaging, or through just constantly bringing the debate and exposing how bad something is, I do believe that at some point in our lifetime, we will see massive amounts of people reject abortion as more and more comes to light as to exactly how bad abortion actually is.
And you believe that young people are truly the catalysts for changing society and our mindset here in Canada? How so?
Well, I mean, to be clear, that can go either way, right? So, in our country right now, the vast majority of young people accept abortion as perfectly permissible. So if you ask the average person, as we do on university campuses, you ask them, what do you think about abortion? And they will say, oh, I'm pro-choice, just totally automatically. It's an automatic response. We've met so many young women who, when they find out they're pregnant, they automatically say, well, I'm going to have an abortion. So you can be a catalyst for change in that way too, by promoting abortion and accepting it and promoting it to your peer group. However, if you're able to convince young people to, and show them the logic and the science that proves that abortion is abhorrent, I think that young people have proven to be the demographic for years and years and years that when they're catalyzed and convicted and mobilized, they will affect great change in our country. And so we're aimed at systematically speaking to young people on a university campus and mobilizing them and giving them opportunities to speak up, just as the pro-choice movement has done with young people, which is one of the reasons that we've seen abortion last for so long in our country.
Ruth, why do you think it is that so many universities are pro-choice and they don't even want the discussion? They're not willing to welcome pro-life voices onto campus? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, so, there's obviously probably money involved somewhere, but we're also dealing with a narrative and a history in our country of abortion being on demand for a very long time. So this is now the third generation that we're seeing who just accepts abortion as totally acceptable. So, you have young people graduating and then coming into positions of leadership. And if no one is affecting that generation in some kind of massive way, then all you're going to see is the continual perpetuation of the abortion rhetoric across our country. I mean, you see that greatly with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He graduated from a university campus, McGill. He did social justice work. He was an advocate for various things, and now he's in a position of leadership promoting certain things that are, destroying the fabric of our country, namely free speech.
Now, you had an interesting experience at Carleton University. Why don't you share with our viewers what happened?
Yeah, so, quite a long time ago, 10 years ago, I was running the Pro-Life Club on my own campus, Carleton University. And, we were aimed at bringing the dialogue to campus no matter what. And so we wanted to put on a display that showed people exactly what abortion was. And the student union and our administration really didn't like us. We were sort of infamous on campus because we wouldn't let up in our messaging. And we applied to use this space on campus to put up the display, and the administration had a big problem with that, and so they denied us the ability to use space that everyone else on campus is allowed to use. And so we said to the university, this is discrimination. It's content-based discrimination. We're tuition-paying students, so we have a right to this property, and it's not for universities to decide who gets to talk about what. universities are meant to be a place where we can explore ideas. And if we want to see Canada remain a democracy, then we have to vehemently and protect our free speech. So they didn't like that very much, and so we said, we're going to do this in protest of the university. So we showed up with our display very peacefully, and they had called the Ottawa City Police to have us arrested, and they handcuffed us and put us in paddy wagons, and then took us to a security building on campus, and then uncuffed us, charged us with trespassing on our own campus, and then told us to go to class.
Oh my goodness.
And so we subsequently filed a lawsuit against the school for their discrimination, but unfortunately we lost because laws, courtrooms are not immune to politics, I would say.
Speaking of politics, how do you feel when leaders say the abortion debate is no longer open? Even the Conservative Party of Canada, the last election, say we're not going to reopen this debate.
Yeah. I think it's incredibly disappointing to see how far removed our politicians are from real life. In our country, a majority of Canadians want to see a restriction on abortion in late term, in the third trimester, and that was recent polling that was released through Angus. And I think you are buying into a narrative that makes them afraid to have a conversation about abortion. But our philosophy is, as is many other organizations in the movement, people are having abortions, and they're having them to the tune of 100,000 a year. So you're talking about a very serious medical procedure that we've politicized to the point where we can't even talk about it. And that's a problem. That's a health risk to women and children, obviously. There are women who are being trafficked who have abortions. There are women who are in abusive relationships who are being pressured. And we can't effectively help any of them because there's this sort of blanket over the whole thing. So long story short, they're wrong. And the more that they try to say the abortion debate is closed, the more that we'll talk about it.
Ruth, what about the, let's say, husband and wife? Let's say the wife was raped, and the husband and wife say, we don't want to have this rapist's child growing inside of my wife. That's why we're having an abortion. What do you say to a couple like that? And they both agree that they don't want to have this child, they don't want to bring this child to term.
So first and foremost, it's critical that anyone who is aiding someone in this situation is able to speak compassionately to the people who are involved, because there are 3 people involved in this situation: the baby, the mom, and the dad. And in fact, they are now parents, whether they planned to be or not. And even if there was someone else involved, this person's wife, right, she was involved. She's now a mom. And as much as that child is partially the result of a rapist, a very horrible person who's done a horrible thing, they're also partially this woman's got her DNA, and that should make them valuable to whoever is involved in the situation, even if they came from a difficult circumstance.
So it's not the baby's fault, right?
It's not the baby's fault.
So maybe just give the baby up for adoption. Maybe bring the baby to term.
Ultimately, abortion is not an eraser, and abortion cannot unrape a rape victim. And so what we say to women is that you're looking at perhaps adding trauma in an already very traumatic situation. There have been many women who've had abortions who say it felt like being raped again because the procedure is very intrusive. And not to say that it won't be extremely difficult, but if we had a woman who had been raped and she decided to keep her child, and then a year later this child starts to look like the rapist, we would not set up a clinic to allow her to go and end the life of that child because that child has the DNA of this rapist as well and looks like this rapist.
What do you say to women, though, Ruth, that say, this is my body, you have no right to tell me what to do with my own body?
Yeah, so what we often say is we ask a lot of questions. So we would predominantly ask first, is there one body or 2 bodies? When you're pregnant, how many bodies are there? And if you're pregnant, do you have 4 arms and 4 legs? Obviously not. You're not, a hermaphrodite. You're carrying someone else's body. And in our species, this is how people procreate. So it's not just your body. And so from a human rights perspective, you need to weigh the rights of both individuals, just like you would in any other situation between two born people. My rights end as soon as I'm going to harm you, and both are considered equal. So similarly, we need to look at the child's rights and the rights of the mom as equal. And in that way, abortion is nothing more than age discrimination, because they're younger, more vulnerable human beings, and for that reason, their rights are discounted.
How did we reach this point, Ruth, that Canada became a country with no restrictions on abortion? I mean, even liberal nations like France and Sweden have gestational restrictions.
Yeah, it's a good question. So again, from my perspective, it's a historical narrative that's been passed down now generation to generation, and the result of abortion is very hidden from the public. You know, you could go, if you're not in some specific field, you could go years without knowing where the abortion clinic is in your city, or that abortions are even happening, or what is abortion at all. People have this very vague concept about what abortion is. And so for that reason, it's easy to build marketing and a narrative around something that people don't really understand. So you know, in our work, we try extremely hard to bring the reality and the truth of abortion to young people and really get them to challenge their own preconceived notions when it comes to abortion, because most of it is just absolutely crazy. Like, we have ultrasound machines and a very clear picture and way to determine when human life begins based on science, logic, and imagery, and yet somehow this narrative has remained intact.
Has that ultrasound maybe changed women's perceptions or opinions about getting an abortion once they
Yeah.
actually see their child inside of their
many,
bodies?
especially in the States where there are fewer regulations in being able to have ultrasound technology in crisis pregnancy care centers or outside abortion clinics. Like, I know an organization that has set one up in a bus, and then as women are heading to the clinic, they ask them like, hey, why don't you just get checked first? And then they're able to convince them to have an ultrasound, and it's had an incredible ability to change women's minds. And I know so many stories like that where once they actually are able to see either what an abortion is or the ultrasound image of their own child and their own offspring, their minds change.
You know what's interesting too, Ruth, is that recent studies have shown that Canadians, though the majority of Canadians are pro-choice, they're actually against gender-selective abortions.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's a bit of a difficulty if you are pro-choice, which is, you know, based on the narrative of women's rights, and yet you promote and support the killing of young women in the womb. You can't have it both ways. Although on university campuses, we have met pro-choice people who justify gender selection under women's rights and choices, and to which we often ask, so women should have the right to kill other women if it's for their own empowerment. You can't have it both ways. So I think pro-choice people who are more reasonable do see that there's a problem with using abortion to kill women. And we're, you know, in China and India, this is certainly proven to be a problem. It's nothing more than dehumanization. And, you know, similarly, there are a lot of pro-choice people who I think would oppose late-term abortion, at least from our experience on campus, and certainly the polling suggests that most reasonable people can see, okay, like if she's in crisis at first, you know, or, having those conversations, but once the baby's viable, all those arguments fall apart. Not that they were very good to begin with, but they become far less understandable.
Sometimes people as well, Ruth, they want to have an abortion when they find out that their child maybe has Down syndrome. You know, there's some real physical challenges with this child. What do you say to that couple?
Well, again, what we've typically said is, would you have the same mentality with a born child who has disabilities? Now, problematically in our country, some people probably would say, end their life as well. So what we try to do is explain value, and we explain that, there are varying, just variables or characteristics that change through the course of your life. And we need to eliminate suffering and not sufferers. And frankly, people with Down syndrome are some of the happiest people that I have ever met, and they bring so much joy and color to our world. And if the left truly wants to be diverse and, identity politics and really value people based on who they really are, then certainly this hypocrisy around abortion when it comes to disabilities is just absolutely ridiculous and needs to change.
I know a couple in Edmonton, they had to wait 3 years to adopt because there was a shortage of babies.
Wow.
So doesn't that make sense then to have the babies, to bring them to term, eliminate abortion, and then bless these families that want to have children and adopt kids?
Yeah, it's a very
have the opportunity, right?
Yeah, very interesting that many people who support abortion are also against adoption, and they say, well, you're going to have a child out there. How traumatic is that? Well, I mean, abortion is extremely traumatic to go through, yet we don't talk about it as a trauma, which adds another trauma to that situation. But yes, you know, I myself was adopted as a baby from India, and I think that, you know, people would be blessed to adopt, and certainly there are more couples waiting to adopt children than there are children in Canada.
Ruth Shaw, Executive Director of National Campus Life Network out of Ottawa. Thanks for joining us here in studio
Thank
today.
you so much for having me.